1952, Marshall Teague finished the 1952 AAA season with a 1,000-point lead over his closest rival, winning 12 of the 13 scheduled events. 11. Hornets driven by NASCAR aces Herb Thomas, Dick Rathman, Al Keller, Frank Mundy, and Tim Flock won 27 NASCAR races driving for the Hudson team. 11. In total, the Hudson Hornet won 48 first-place finishes and came in second 23 times in 1952.
The greatest, but if your car is not the greatest, you're not going to win.
Hudson hired a guy named Vince Piggins to run their NASCAR program.
He was just brilliant. He was part of that golden team of people who knew exactly what they were doing and did it very well.
He had an engineering background, and Vince was the overseer of the program. And Vince cultivated relationships. He was the go-between between Hudson, the company, and the racers. And he made sure the racers had what they need. They also hired Smokey Yunick to be crew chief and develop the cars mechanically.
Smokey was a genius.
An irascible genius, but a genius nevertheless.
Smokey had built quite a reputation as being a great race builder. Had found some unique ways to get around some NASCAR rules, and he was quite proud of those.
Everybody used to talk about how he cheated. He said, I didn't cheat, I just did what wasn't in the rule book. And then they'd find it and they'd put it in the rule book.
Hudson had a great relationship with the drivers. Marshall Teague is kind of considered the person that started company team racing. He somehow figured out how to make that work. Marshall went out, got Herb Thomas to join him. Daddy happened to be leading the points. So he was kind of drafted into it. Marshall approached him, they got together, and sure enough, that was the beginning of Hudson and Daddy.
Here comes Herb Thomas in another Teague car.
And by 52, oh man, they were off and gone.
Herb Thomas is still ahead on the beat. Teague is taking punting block for second.
Herb Thomas brought a level of professionalism and a level of driving skill to the Hudson team that nobody else had.
Herb was one of the finest natural drivers.
He saw these guys running, he said, well, hell, if they can do it, I can do it. And sure enough, he could.
Watch closely or you'll miss Herb Thomas as he pilots his car at breakneck speed.
Apparently he just self-taught, and it started coming to him as he raced, and he kept getting better and better and better. And then here comes the Hudson, and it was just a perfect match.
Once he got in that car, Smokey Yunick and him were just about unbeatable.
Daddy didn't like to listen to people, but he listened to Smokey. If it was a big event and there was going to be a new car like at Daytona or Darlington, Smokey would build that race car and Daddy would take it over afterwards. He worked on the car.
He was the first owner-driver champion in NASCAR. He was the first two-time champion in NASCAR.
And the 2 years he wasn't champion, he was second.
Herb Thomas throws coal on the fire and lead foots it up the wall into the first turn.
Herb Thomas drove trucks in the Army in World War II. He came from a farming family in a little town called Olivia, North Carolina.
He was a tobacco farmer, and he was a sawmill owner, but he could drive a race car like nobody else. Herb kind of fell into racing after the war. He ran modifieds. He took his dad's Plymouth, ran it. I don't think Dad knew.
He did take his father's car, and he won some money. I think he won like $25 in a race. He felt horrible about it, so he told his dad about it, gave him the money, and then decided, okay, I can do this.
He entered the first NASCAR strictly stock race at Charlotte in 1949, won races in Plymouths and Oldsmobiles, and then moved to the fabulous Hudson Hornet in 1951.
He was competitive every racetrack he went to. Herb was the kind of guy that strictly business. He didn't party at night. He went to the racetrack to race. When my dad had come in, it took me 7 hours. Herb always said, I got there in 6 hours. I mean, no matter how fast you got there, Herb was always going to be the first one there. Then he wanted to be the first one to leave because he won the race.
Like Lee Petty, he was a no-nonsense owner-driver. He believed you either won or it's not worth talking about.
He never rested. It was every day he went after it. They were a working couple, and he had the support of my mother. And he could have never done this without her. She was a contributor.
He wasn't somebody in there for the glory. He was not there for the publicity. He was there to win. If you look at sports today, it really hasn't changed. You have some guys who are braggadocious and loud and confrontational, and you have some guys who all they want to do is go out and play.
This is the famous team of the Flock brothers. I guess you'd call us famous. This is Bob and Tim and Bonnie.
The Flock brothers, Bob, Fonnie, and Tim, had very outsized personalities. They were guys who were very popular and fan favorites, very outgoing and very engaging. Guys like Herb Thomas and Lee Petty were more businessmen. Tim Flock was more the face of Hudson, the company.
Tim Flock had a monkey in his race car. Jocko Flocko was the name of the monkey.
Ted bought the monkey and had a seamstress in Atlanta to sew this monkey 2 real nice uniforms, had his name put on it, got him a helmet with goggles.
Had Jocko's name on the roof of the car facing the grandstand. Had this little seat that was mounted next to Tim.
Now, we didn't tell any of the drivers or promoters or anybody about this monkey going to be riding me in that first race. Going down the backstretch, some of these drivers would look over, and here's this monkey grinning at them, looking out the window. Some of those cars almost actually run into the fences.
It did wonders for Hudson, and the kids loved him. And they asked Tim, says, "Where's Jocko? We miss Jocko." He said, "Sorry, kids, I had to fire him. I couldn't teach him to sign his autograph."
You know, if you had a monkey like Jocko riding with you there, you'd be awful popular.
NASCAR was just crazy back in those days, you know? Anything to make a buck, anything to promote the race, anything to make it fun.
Herb Thomas is 52 in the lead, then Buddy Flock in 14. Herb Thomas is still ahead on the beat, but Teague is taking Buddy Flock for second.
It was pretty cool growing up with him. And there was just trophies all over the house. I mean, every room just had walls of trophies. He was so quiet, he would never talk about it.
Daddy was just as happy making a good crop of tobacco as I imagine he was racing.
If I wanted the stories and find out what went on in those races and how he got to where he was, Grandma would tell me everything. But I do know he knows it was important. We were heading down to the farm first thing in the morning. It's, 5:30 in the morning, and Grandma's riding shotgun, reading the newspaper. My brother and I in the back. We're, probably 10, 12 years old. And somebody came around him on the outside. And we were in that 1970 Pontiac Grand Prix, and he just went wide open on it, holding it, and Grandma's hitting him with the newspaper. "Herbert!" He looks over at her, and he ain't had no business passing me.
Well, Herb entered 131 races in his lifetime, and he won 43 of those in Hudson's. And if you check Herb's record today, he still has the highest percentage of races won to races entered.
And he didn't race that long either. Figure he was out of there by 55, 56. And there's no telling where he could have gone if he had stayed healthy.
Win on Sundays, sell on Monday was the slogan that was created in the early 50s.
I would call the advertising agency after the race and say, "Well, we won again," and they'd have an ad in the paper the next day. It kept us alive, as a matter of fact. It increased our sales immensely.
See the U.S. Stock Car Champion at your Hudson dealers now.
Yeah, it's amazing to me how quickly Hudson fell from being the king of the hill all those years. And not only did they win 3 straight championships, they came in second in points in those 3 championships too. I mean, nobody could touch them. And for them to be right here and then to fall off the cliff, I don't understand.
It did not change its style. And the style remained the same for so many years, they refused to spend the money.
The Hornet was a very successful Hudson vehicle. There's no doubt about that. But you have to remember the overall economy for the independents during those early 50s. All of them were beginning to suffer. So it was a tough time.
In every year, Hudson Hornet sales declined. Some of the smaller automakers, Hudson being one of them, didn't have the financial resources to develop technology as quickly as GM or Ford or Chrysler. What Hudson did on the track was impressive. What they didn't do was follow it up.
They didn't come out with a V8 because they didn't think they needed it. It was a flathead. It had two one-barrel carburetors. I mean, it was as old school as you could possibly get. But it was old school taken to its final resting place, or whatever you want to call it. The last days of old technology will always be the first days of new technology. The Hudson still had the edge initially, and of course, buyers being conservative, I've had Hudsons before. I think I'm going to stick with the Hudson until it became inevitable, couldn't compete. And that's really what sort of killed Hudson. The pressure of, you know, the expression, I could have had a V8.
Wow, I could have had a V8.
Ford came out with its overhead valve engine, and Chevy came out with its overhead, small block Chevy, and that was the end of it. I mean, that was the end of Hudson competitively.
The checker flag.
A lot of people think Hudson executives didn't really understand what was happening in the decline. In '53, Hudson tooled up and built a new small car. And frankly, that market didn't hit us until closer to the early '60s.
Hudson was in bad shape all along the line.
So Nash and Hudson got together, and in May of 1954, they merged and formed American Motors Corporation. It was the largest merger in corporate history up until that point in time. They moved production to Kenosha, Wisconsin, and they built cars there for 3 years, basically a Nash-bodied Hudson. And 1957 then was the end of the mark.
Hudsons, in their time in NASCAR, won 79 races. Herb Thomas won 39 of the 79.
Herb Thomas sets a new record for the 250 miles. It must have been a dusty 3.5 hours.
He won at West Palm Beach Speedway in 1955. It was the last victory Hudson ever got. And then he changed to Chevrolet because Hudson was going under. Vince Piggins needed a new gig, and he was the perfect guy to launch Chevrolet's Skunk Works program, you know, behind closed doors at Nolly Chevrolet in Atlanta.
He would be the one that would be responsible for any racing influence that you see there.
He had all that knowledge from his years at Hudson, and he put it to good use.
In a Chevrolet,
Herb Thomas became the first three-time Southern 500 winner. But really, unfortunately, his career came to an end in 1956.
He got hurt at Shelby, North Carolina in a very controversial race.
He was leading the point stand, and we had this guy, Keycaper, Mercury Outboard Motors, and he was strictly the first professional team that came in.
Keycaper was a guy who took no prisoners. You know, he wanted everything his way, and he wanted to win no matter what.
He was behind on the points, and we were getting down to the end of the season.
Keycaper was able to buy an extra race from NASCAR.
To give his two drivers, Buck Baker and Speedy, an opportunity to overtake Herb.
Somewhere during that particular race, Herb had a bad accident.
They were running 1, 2, 3, Herb, Speedy, and Buck, and Speedy got into the quarter panel of my grandfather. Car rolled over, and I think he was in a coma for 30 days.
And fractured his skull and nearly died.
There's no movies of it. There's some people who were there that night who saw it, but it's all their interpretation. Even today, people will tell you there's no cut and dried answer. It all depends on who you talk to. Somebody said, yeah, old Herb, he got taken out by Speedy. And other folks said, no, it was just a racing accident. We'll never know.
It really messed him all up, and that was the end of his career.
So Buck did run those last couple races, got enough points to pass Granddaddy. But he had 56 in the bag. He had 3 titles at that point, probably been more of a household name.
If he had kept racing for another 4 or 5 years, holy cow, yeah, there's no telling how far he could have gone.
Even though he did run some more races, it wasn't Herb Thomas.
There was a lot left in me. I never got a chance to show him.
Pixar came to the NASCAR Hall of Fame looking for an idea on what would be the supercar of the 1950s. And we said it's got to be the Hudson Hornet. Absolutely has to be the Hudson Hornet.
We wanted to have an older race car, and that character would serve two purposes. One, to show a character that had left the racing world behind, that maybe had the back turned on them from the racing world.